So why does the census matter, or why is the census important? The census is important. The census is important for a few reasons. One, it is constitutionally mandated. It's also important because it's an opportunity for community organizations to help build community power, and they can do that by reaching out to folks they don't normally reach, or also just doing another touch on community residents and building their base. They can also establish new organizational relationships, both across regions and across issues. And finally, it's an opportunity for organizations to develop community leaders by having them play prominent roles in census outreach efforts. The census is important, however, ultimately because of how census data are used. And the data are used in primarily three ways. One way is to ensure protection of civil rights legislation. So when you think of the Civil Rights Act of '64, the Voting Rights Act of '65, equal employment legislation, census data or census-derived data are all used to monitor and enforce that type of legislation. Census data are also used to ensure equal and equitable political representation. So every 10 years, seats in the House of Representatives are reapportioned, and states can gain or lose seats based on population estimates that come from the census count. Those population estimates are also used to redraw political districts from the local to the federal level. So you think of your city council, your school district, your county supervisorial board, to your state legislative districts, congressional districts. All of those districts are drawn using population estimates from the census count. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, census data are used to guide the allocation of over $600 billion annually in federal funding for services related to healthcare, education, housing, and more. And just the largest 16 federal programs that rely on census-derived data, California receives over $76 billion annually. Those programs include Section 8, Head Start and Early Head Start, Medicaid, and Medicare as examples. All right. So there's a lot at stake. And in order for the Inland Empire to receive its fair share of political representation and federal funding in the decade after 2020, the Census Bureau has to count all of the region's residents accurately. However, there are three factors or three sets of risk factors that are converging that are going to make it difficult for the Bureau to do that. Those factors are the region's demographics, innovations by the Census Bureau, and shifts in the federal landscape. Today, I'll briefly address each one of these, beginning with the last. So shifts in the federal landscape have occurred over the last few years and are really hampering the Bureau's ability to get an accurate count. Some of the most notable shifts include chronic underfunding of the Bureau. Although fiscal year 2018 was relatively better, there were several years prior to that where the Census Bureau received far less than what it expected and didn't receive the ramp up that it's accustomed to. And that led to the Bureau adjusting plans and preparations. Additionally, although the Census Bureau had a permanent director sworn in last week, the Bureau has been without permanent leadership for the last year and a half, which has meant that it hasn't had an advocate to fight for what it needs on the Hill and with the White House. Beyond this, there have been shifts in federal immigration policy. So as most folks know, the Trump administration issued some executive orders, and the Department of Homeland Security has interpreted those orders and implemented those orders in a way that have ramped up and increased immigration enforcement. And this has led to increased fear in immigrant communities, and which has the chance or increases the likelihood that members of those communities are going to be reluctant to participate in the census. Additionally, we've seen a rise in Islamophobia, and this similar to the shifts we've seen in immigration policy and its effects. We anticipate this increasing fear and increasing the likelihood that members of the Muslim community will be reluctant to participate in the census. Given our demographics in California, we stand to be most adversely impacted by these types of shifts. We have the largest percentage of foreign-born residents at 27%, and we have a large Muslim population in this country. So we have a lot of reason to be concerned. But our risk is exacerbated by another set of factors. And those relate to how the Census Bureau will administer the 2020 census. So the 2020 census will be unlike any in our country's history. And that largely has to do with 4 innovations that the Census Bureau plans to implement. After the 2010 census, Congress mandated that the Census Bureau conduct the 2020 census at a cost per household that does not exceed the cost per household of the 2010 census. In order to meet that congressional mandate, the Bureau moved forward with implementing what it calls 4 innovations. You can see those on your screen there. I just want to draw attention right now to one in particular, and that is as you see there, internet as primary mode of self-response. That's a major shift, and one that I'm sure quite a few folks have heard about. But the Census Bureau, this will be the first time that the Census Bureau is relying on the internet as a mode of self-response and as the primary mode of self-response. I want to emphasize that it will be the primary mode, not the only mode. Residents will be able to respond to the census via paper questionnaire and telephonically. An additional administrative shift that we anticipate, but one that is not included in the 4 innovations that the Census Bureau has said it wants to implement to meet the congressional mandate, has to do with the citizenship question, which is something I'm sure a lot of folks have heard about. The Secretary of Commerce, Wilbur Ross, last year directed the Census Bureau to add a question about citizenship to the 2020 census questionnaire. And since then, and even before then, there's been a lot of opposition, but most relevant for right now is noting that there are about half dozen lawsuits against against the citizenship question and requesting that it be removed. The first ruling came down last week. A district judge in New York ruled against the Trump administration and directed the Census Bureau to remove the question. However, that's not going to be the final word. The Trump administration appealed the decision and is also filing, so it's in the Court of Appeals. However, the administration has also indicated that they plan to initiate another filing and request that the Supreme Court hear a case about the citizenship question in April or May. And the reason for that timing is that the Census Bureau has made clear that a decision needs to be made by June, because June is when the Bureau begins printing paper questionnaires. So they need a decision by then. So that gives you a sense of the timeline we're on. Again, as mentioned, California has the largest percentage of foreign-born residents. So having a question like this, which we anticipate depressing response rates, would have an adverse impact on the state of California in particular. The third set of factors putting both California at risk and the Inland Empire at risk has to do with what are popularly referred to as hard to count or HTC populations. Generally speaking, hard to count populations are those populations that are less likely for various reasons to participate in the census. The state of California recognizes at least 15, and those are listed on your screen. If you actually count, you'll see 16, but that's because we separate Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. The state lumps those populations together. But these are the populations that the state of California recognizes, and these are populations that are recognized more broadly. Two populations that you don't see here, or one population that you don't see here, are low-income communities. That's also considered to be a hard-to-count population. California is the hardest to count state in the country, primarily because we have a large number of hard-to-count populations, and even within those populations, we have large numbers. So if there's a hard-to-count population, California has it, and we have those populations in large numbers. CPAN, as I mentioned, the Census Policy Advocacy Network earlier, CPAN estimates that 15.1 million Californians at a minimum are hard to count. And the Inland Empire has a sizable share of that number. We estimate that around 2 million residents in the Inland Empire are hard to count, and you can see those numbers broken down by race and ethnicity here for Riverside County. And what you see it broken down by race and ethnicity, but you'll also see it broken down by the population living within census tracts with high and very high low response scores, and you'll see the category of HTC population living outside of those census tracts. We think it's important to make that distinction. From the Census Bureau's perspective, when they think about the hard to enumerate or the hard to count, it's primarily through a geographic-based lens. They identify census geographies that are going to be hard to count for various reasons, and they use a metric to identify what those hard to count geographies are going to be. In 2010, they used what they called the hard to count metric. For the 2020 census, they're using what they call the low response score. So that's their metric for identifying particular geographies that are going to be hard to enumerate. And the low response score is based on an analysis of about 24 variables. It's important to take that approach and to understand what geographies are going to be hard to count, but we think it's also important to take that population-based approach and also pay attention to individuals that will be hard to count, but don't live in those geographies that are themselves hard to count. And so what you see here are a column with population estimates of those who are hard to count within hard to count geographies and those who are hard to count outside of those geographies. And those who are hard to count outside of those geographies, we identified by identifying at least one variable that would make them hard to count. So for Latinos, it's non-citizens. For non-Hispanic whites, it's those living below the poverty line. For Asian Americans, it's those with limited English proficiency. For Blacks and African Americans, it's those living below the poverty line. And for American Indian, Alaska Natives, and Pacific Islanders, it's just the remainder of the population. Given the relative small size of those populations and the fact that they're just generally hard to count, we and our partners didn't think it made sense to identify any particular variable. So we're taking those populations as a whole, but just dividing them by those that live within hard to count census geographies and those that live outside. I do want to note here that there is a bit of an issue with the data that we noticed in conversation with our partner who did the analysis for us and the population estimates for us. And we're in conversations with the partner to adjust those. And so when we'll be sending out documents after this webinar, and those documents will have adjusted tables. And what you will see is actually an increase in the numbers. So that's what you'll see in the documents that we send. So you see Riverside County here, and we have San Bernardino County as well. And again, so you're looking at approximately 2 million, but when we make those adjustments, it may be a bit over that for those populations. All right. We generally have a sense of what makes populations hard to count, and most of the reasons why populations are less likely to participate in the census has to do with barriers. And there are some general barriers that we're familiar with. Uncertainty about the purpose and use of census data. So there are a lot of folks out there that don't know that there's a decennial census, and also don't understand why it's necessary to participate, what the data are used for, and what the consequences could be of having that bad data or having bad data. Additionally, there's uncertainty about who should be included. That's how a lot of children actually get missed. Parents and caregivers not knowing that children should be included. Not knowing that infants should be included, fear and mistrust of government, and also language barriers related to limited English proficiency are also some key barriers to census participation. So the challenge for organizations and folks in the Inland Empire concerned about ensuring that the region gets its fair share of political representation and federal funding is to help approximately 2 million residents and more overcome those barriers that were listed and more to ensure that they participate in the census. To give us a deeper sense of where the hard to count are in the Inland Empire, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Alejandro.
Perfect. Thank you, John. All right, there you go. Cool. All right. So next, we're going to go in deeper into Inland Empire's hard to count population. And so I wanted to share that we conducted a data analysis of the hotspots, basically the census tracts that are scoring very high in the low response score scale, so 30 and above. We utilized data from the Census Bureau, so the Outreach Area Mapper, or known as ROAM, which you see on your screen, and you have also the link to it. If folks have not gone on it, I invite you to it. It's something that it's a resource for folks to really dive in and actually explore your regions, and dive in terms of the different census tracts that have a variety of like census scores, low response scores there. Given the time constraints for this webinar, we will be presenting a sample of our analysis that focuses on the very high LRS census tracts. So as John has mentioned, this ROAM data that we utilize captures the low response score for each of the census tracts across the country. And so basically what it captures is the percentage of households that are predicted to not self-respond back to the census. So essentially it's capturing the hard-to-count populations by geography. So based on the analysis of those variables, so variables such as age group, if it's renter occupied housing, median household income, poverty level, race and ethnicity, and so forth. And so these are some of the variables that were used to then compute and give each of the census tract a score. So when we did our analysis, we looked at all the census tracts that scored 30 and above on the LRS. And then we narrowed our analysis on the top 25 census tracts by their LRS scores. So among the top 25 census tracts, we ranked them based on different demographics, which include race and ethnicity, children 0 to 5, median household income, so a variety of variables that we were looking at and ranking them, you know, from those that were ranking percentage and raw number really high, and so forth. So given that most groups who will be doing census outreach may be looking more at the demographics based on race and ethnicity. For today's webinar, I will be providing you samples of the top 10 for each of the different race and ethnic categories. So that way you can have a sense of like the kind of information and the kind of analysis that we did. I will also be highlighting today some of the key census tracts for Riverside and San Bernardino counties, just to demonstrate the diversity and also the concentration of the different demographic variables that each of the census tracts hold. And this is a way of just really highlighting both the top 25, census tracts based on the very high LRS score, and also these key census tracts as a way just to inform your plans as you move forward in developing your outreach plans in the region, and really thinking about which census tracts to prioritize as well. So our analysis of the top 25 census tracts for each of the demographics was done both by percentage and also by raw numbers. So that way you have an understanding of how you want to go ahead and prioritize different census tracts and by which metric, if it's by percentage or raw numbers. So all of this data, all of the detailed information, including the geography locations of these census tracts, will be provided as handouts after today's webinar. So don't stress if you're getting all these tract numbers and you don't know where they're at, you will have that information afterwards. So let's dive in to the data. So first off, I just wanted to share with you screenshots of the ROAM website and to give you a sense of what you would look at. And so for us, looking at this screen, so we have a snapshot of one of the areas of Riverside County. And as you can look at your screen, the darker the blue, those are the census tracts that have the highest, very high LRS score. So I just wanted you to get a glimpse, especially as you're thinking about the different areas that either you're based in or the communities that you're reaching into. How do these hard-to-count populations, these very high hard-to-count populations overlap where the work that you're doing? So here's another section of Riverside County. As you can see, Moreno Valley, Paris down there, Hemet, Banning, Beaumont are some of the areas. And here's another snapshot of Riverside County as well. So on your left-hand side, you see Lake Elsinore up there, and also you see Mecca having a big chunk of its area actually be very high, having a very high LRS score, and on the bottom, Blythe as well. This is the snapshots for San Bernardino County, so you can get a sense. Again, as you're looking in terms of the census outreach, and as John was mentioning about building community power, it's really thinking about, is this an opportunity for a lot of you to expand your base, and expand your reach into other geographic areas that you may not have a presence. And as you're looking at this, we hope that partners are starting to have conversations and even thinking about what areas folks don't have a coverage or a presence in. Right? So those are some of the maps for San Bernardino County. Cool. So this next slide, it's showing you just a snapshot also about those census tracts that are very high on the LRS score. And for both Riverside and San Bernardino, you have a sense now of like how many census tracts we're talking about that are scoring very high. And it's also divided by city. So every city you get to see, you have a city or an unincorporated area, you have a sense of how many census tracts that are very high on the LRS score they contain. So for Riverside County, it's 56 total at the very high level. And then for San Bernardino County, 68. I also highlighted some of the cities or areas that actually contain the highest number of very high LRS census tracts as well. Moving forward, so also here, I'm providing you just the population estimates within these very high census tracts. So it's just estimates in terms of how many people are we talking total that live in the very high census tracts. So for Riverside, it's over 286,000 people. For San Bernardino, it's a little bit more, 368,000. And so here you also see the comparison of how many folks are below poverty, the poverty level, how many folks are Latino, Black, Asian American, and so forth. So this is just to give you another snapshot of just the scale of how big. And this, again, it's just the very high census tracts. So now we get into the top 10. So top 10 census tracts based on LRS score. And as you can see here on this page, you have the top one for Riverside is tract 465. And this is the area surrounding UC Riverside. Something to note is that one of the reasons why this tract might be scoring very high is that because of the college student population. So for the Census Bureau, one of the areas they target first geographically to administer the census is actually around college campuses, given that students are one of the hard to count populations as well. So this kind of gives an indication as to why, this area has scored very high. For San Bernardino, tract 2207 is the southeastern area of Rancho Cucamonga. So this gives you an opportunity to kind of notice, right, what areas are scoring very high on the census tracts, and these are the top 10. The next top 10 is based on Latino population percentage-wise, right? So here we see that for Riverside, Coachella Valley, or Coachella, is actually ranking, 3 of its census tracts are up on the top 3. So the first one, 45704, that's the eastern area of Coachella. For San Bernardino, we see tract number 16. And this one is around the airport and west of the airport, Ontario Airport. So here is just a sense for folks that are planning to outreach to the Latino community. These are the census tracts that we would recommend to incorporate and to prioritize. The next one is for the top 10 for Black and African American community. And so for Riverside, you see that even the top 4 are all within Moreno Valley. The one that's ranking number 1, 42506, it's the northwest corner of Moreno Valley, around there. And then for San Bernardino, tract 6203, it's the northeast Sterling area of San Bernardino. Next, we have the top 10 for Asian Americans. And so here, again, percentage-wise, we see that, again, 465, the area around UC Riverside, ranks number 1, percentage-wise, for Asian American. For San Bernardino, that one is west of Loma Linda University. It's located west, and it actually crosses into the city of San Bernardino, that tract. And that one is also number 1 for that county. Next up is the top 10 for American Indian Alaska Native. And here we see that number 1 for Riverside County is Banning. tract 442, and this is the west central area bordering the Morongo Reservation. For San Bernardino, 35.1 is the downtown area of Rialto, where you have the biggest, the highest percentage of American Indian Alaska Native. Finally, top 10 for Pacific Islanders. So here you see that number 1 is in Beaumont, tract 440, and this is surrounding the area around the 10, where the 10 freeway and Beaumont Avenue intersect. And then for San Bernardino, the number 1 tract there is 80.02, and that's north of downtown Redlands. So again, this was really fast. It's a lot of data. Again, we will be sharing all of these in handouts with more detailed information, and it won't just be the top 10, but it will be the top 25 tracts. So moving forward, I wanted to take some time to also highlight, key census tracts for each of the county, just to kind of get a sense of how big the different demographics by percentage and raw numbers are concentrated in certain tracts, and that they contain multiple demographics. So here for Riverside, 465 again. So as you can see, here you have the area around UC Riverside. It's highlighted in blue. It has like a blue boundary around it. And on here we have that this area is number 1 for renter population percentage-wise, Asian American population, both raw numbers and percentages. And you can see where it ranks in some of the other demographics. Here's another census tract, 45604, which is in Mecca. And this one also ranking number 1 on several indicators here. And then lastly for Riverside County, tract 45705 in Coachella. So this one ranks number 2, but on several areas. So you can see here the different demographics that this tract contains. So moving to San Bernardino County. So tract number 16 in Ontario, around Ontario Airport. Again, it has a lot of different demographics here. As you can see, number 1 for Latino population percentage-wise and foreign-born percentage-wise. Then we have the next tract in San Bernardino Central area, tract 56, also containing several types of, top, 1 for below poverty percentage-wise, even number 3 for lowest household income. And then lastly, we have Adelanto, tract 9116. And here you also see the different demographics that are concentrated in this tract alone. Perfect. So, right now, just John and I, we shared, basically the challenges when it comes to ensuring a complete count of all our census tracts into the communities that are hard to count. This is something that we wanted to provide so that we inform, what's at stake, but also the scale of the efforts that are going to be needed on the ground. So this information is something that's really important that we wanted you to keep, and to really think about how you prioritize, certain areas, certain census tracts as you're developing your plans. So don't want to leave this with you freaking out and thinking, oh my gosh, it's so big, it's so much. But I want to turn it over to Sky and Dr. Ramakrishnan to provide you with details in terms of what is happening at the state, but also more importantly, locally, to ensure that we have a complete count in the Inland Empire. So I will be turning it over to them, and I will be unmuting your mics in just one moment. Perfect. You all are unmuted.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Sky Allen. I am the Census Coordinator with Inland Empowerment. But more specifically, I'm going to be working with San Bernardino and Riverside County Census Outreach Table, which essentially is a group of a bunch of different nonprofits in the region who are working together to ensure that our community gets counted in the census. So up on the screen right now, is my phone number and my email address. If you have any questions or want to get involved in this table, feel free to reach out to me and we can coordinate and figure out how you can get involved. But I'm going to take the next couple of minutes to try to explain some of the things that we're doing to give context. I know there's a couple people that are on this call who are already a part of the table, so I apologize if this is a bit redundant, but for those of you who are not a part of the table, this may be good information so that you have this background of why the census matters and why our community is vulnerable, but like, what do you do about it? Hopefully I can help answer some of those questions. So next slide, please. So a bit of background. About around last summer, Dr. Ramakrishnan, who is going to be hopping in and helping me explain this in a minute, he identified the fact that the census was less than 2 years away and he didn't really see a lot of action in the area, but what we were going to be doing about it because as has been previously expressed, the Inland Empire tends to be underfunded and undercounted in the census, so we want to make sure that doesn't happen anymore. So he started communicating with the counties. He started communicating with nonprofits to figure out, what are we doing, what can we be doing to ensure people are counted. He reached out to Inland Empowerment in particular, and after having conversations with him and realizing the need for serious action around the census, we created this table of various nonprofits that has since grown to include over 30 different partners in all over the Inland Empire in both San Bernardino and Riverside County to coordinate outreach and ensure that we're not duplicating efforts, but at the same time we're covering as many people as possible. And we've been planning a plan, I guess you could say, since November, December of last year, and we're close to the end of finishing the planning part of it and moving into the implementation. I'll talk more about what that means in a moment, but I wanted to allow Dr. Ramakrishnan to share a little bit of information about the history of collaboration and then also the relationship between our group of nonprofits and the county, where the county is in the census counts.
Great. Thank you, Sky. So let's see. I don't know if let me see if I can share my video. In terms of the census work, it's really exciting. I mean, so first of all, thank you to Alejandra and John for laying out what is at stake in terms of the demographic analysis. And Sky is going to be presenting some of the mapping work that we've already done in a bit. I just want to take this opportunity to take a step back and lay out what the opportunity is for our region. So not only is census important for all of the various reasons mentioned, we in our region see this as an enormous opportunity to innovate. Okay, someone's asking me to speak louder, so I'll speak louder. I'll get closer. So it's a huge opportunity for us to innovate, and it's been really impressive in terms of how the region, not only the nonprofit table, but Riverside County and San Bernardino County, their governments have come together. And I think when all is said and done, what we'll be doing in terms of the work of the nonprofit table, in terms of the work of governments, but together in terms of the work of the Complete Count Committee is it's gonna be really impressive, and it's a historic moment for our region. And I don't think I'm being, too wild-eyed when I say that. So what's happening now with respect to the Complete Count Committee, you'll hear both about the nonprofit table. Well, you're going to be hearing a lot about Census 2020 between now and April of next year and even beyond. One key thing I think it's important for community organizations to keep in mind is that the Complete Count Committee is working in coordination with the nonprofit table, but these are two separate entities. Mm-hmm. So there is an Inland Empire Complete Count Committee. It just got approved 2 weeks ago by San Bernardino County Board of Supervisors, and it got approved by Riverside County Board of Supervisors last week. It's going to be a regional effort involving both counties, nonprofits, businesses, higher education, and as many kinds of community organizations one could think of, all under one roof. The goal of the Complete Count Committee is to share information and share information and engage in strategic planning so that we don't leave any gaps in terms of what the field outreach is going to look like, and that we make the most efficient use of our resources and that we're communicating across sectors in terms of the work that needs to happen and communicating as the work happens. The Complete Count Committee is going to be composed of many subcommittees. Some of these subcommittees are going to be organized by sub-region. Some of them are going to be organized according to the hard-to-count population in the Inland Empire. And then some of them are going to be organized according to function. So for example, media and outreach, research and evaluation. The reason why I lay this out in terms of the Complete Count Committee subcommittees is that occasionally you will hear about a nonprofit table, regional coordinator, and a regional table for the nonprofit work that is occurring. Sometimes those will overlap with what the Complete Count Committee subcommittee will look like, sometimes they will not. But we rest assured that we are working in coordination across sectors here to make sure that the work that's happening on the ground and also the way the funding flows from both state and private sources are done in a way that is most effective. And that's and I think I'll leave it at that. One last thing I'll say is, in addition to making sure that people are aware of the importance of census and the need to participate, we will also be focusing on issues like digital divide, right? So Dr. DeBar talked earlier about all of these innovations in census. We want to make sure that we address the problem of lack of access to high-speed internet and computing in many of our communities. But we're also looking at field outreach efforts as a way for us to build community capacity and community intelligence. So in terms of asset mapping, it's really exciting. We're going to be working with our county partners and other government partners and nonprofit partners throughout the Inland Empire region to make sure that the benefits of this field outreach are not confined only to Census 2020, but that there will be an important legacy effect for our region that will strengthen our region moving into the next decade.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much. I see there's a question about the strategic plan. Hopefully I'll be able to address that question within the next couple slides. So if you want to move forward one more, I can start getting into what we've been doing, not just kind of how it came about. So like I said, we've been working together, trying to come up with a plan to ensure that we're all counted since maybe November-ish of last year. But mid-December, the state actually released an RFP outlining what their requirements were to receive state funding. So since then, we've been kind of restructuring our plan a little bit to ensure that we qualify and that we'll be able to secure the funding that's been set aside for the region so that we can ensure that everyone is counted. So a little bit of background about that RFP in case you're not familiar. The state of California has allocated $90.3 million total in regards to outreach for the census, and 27 million of that 90.3 million are allocated to community-based organizations. That's split across 10 different regions, and both San Bernardino and Riverside County together make up one region, Region 7, and that's kind of the basis for our table to organize all of the nonprofit organizations within our region so that we can collectively apply for the RFP and secure the $2.4 million available to our region for our tables, that we have as much control as possible of the funding that's coming down and the outreach that's going to be had, because we think we are the most qualified group of community-based organizations to do that work. So kind of moving forward, just to give a framework for it, the Community Foundation is going to be our backbone administrative community-based organization, and then they're going to be subcontracting all of the different a good chunk of the different nonprofits that are at our table, and we're all going to be working collectively to do the work. The RFP is the, I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's the state's application to receive funding for census outreach work. So hopefully that answers your request for proposal. Thank you so much. If you want to move forward to the next slide, just to be cognizant of time. To get into the specifics of what we're going to be doing. So we've created a plan where we have a certain structure. Like I said, the Community Foundation of Riverside is going to be our administrative community-based organization. We have technical support from UCR and from NALEO. And then all of the different nonprofits are going to be working together to through collaboration and coordination of outreach to make sure everyone is counted. Is it possible to move on to the next slide?